It was past 2 a.m., and I was driving home through vast, empty farmlands after leaving my friend's house. The roads were deserted, the silence outside only broken by the occasional rustle of wind through the fields. I was exhausted, barely keeping my focus on the endless stretch of road ahead, when suddenly, my headlights illuminated something unusual. A suitcase. It stood upright, dead center in my lane, as if someone had carefully placed it there. I instinctively slammed the brakes, my heart thudding in my chest. The sight was bizarre. No other cars, no signs of life. Just a single, forgotten suitcase standing in the middle of nowhere. Who left it here, and why? I didn't want to stop. Something about the suitcase felt wrong, like it was deliberately placed there, waiting for someone like me to pull over. I slowly swerved around it, keeping my eyes on the road ahead. As I passed, my headlights cast long, unnatural shadows across the empty fields. I told myself it was nothing, just a lost piece of luggage that had fallen off someone's truck, right? I kept driving. 5 minutes passed. The road was empty again, my anxiety starting to fade. Then I saw it. A truck. It was parked directly in the middle of the lane, completely dark. No headlights, no hazard lights, nothing. I sat there for a moment, staring at the motionless truck in front of me. No lights, no movement inside. I honked. Once, twice, nothing. I tried to peer through the truck's rear window, but the darkness made it impossible to see inside. That's when I noticed the dents and scratches along the side of the truck. Some of them were deep, like something or someone had hit it with force. Something wasn't right. I decided to drive around it just like I had with the suitcase. As I passed, I felt my stomach tighten. The driver's seat was empty. There was no one inside. And worse, there were no footprints in the dirt around it. It was as if the truck had just appeared there. Then, barely a minute later, I saw him. A man standing in the middle of the road. He was waving his arms, signaling for me to stop. I hesitated. The man looked disheveled. His clothes were dirty, his arms covered in scratches. His smile was unsettling, like it didn't quite belong on his face. As I rolled down my window just a crack, he took a step closer. "Hey, did you see a truck back there?" he asked. His voice was casual, but there was something off about his tone. I swallowed hard. "Yeah, I did." His smile widened. "Think you could give me a lift back?" My heart started pounding. If his truck had run out of gas, why wasn't he asking me to take him to a gas station? I stalled, trying to think of an excuse to say no. But then, I saw it. Behind him, barely visible in the tall crops beside the road, a car. It was crashed deep into the field, its rear lights barely reflecting in my headlights, and I knew, with absolute certainty, that was not his truck. My stomach dropped. The man was still standing by my window, grinning, but now his eyes were different, wider, expectant, like he knew I had seen the car. I rolled up the window immediately. His expression changed instantly. His grin disappeared, replaced by a look of rage. He lunged at my car, pounding on the glass with both fists. I hit the gas. My tires screeched against the pavement as I sped past him, my hands shaking as I struggled to keep control of the wheel. In my rearview mirror, I saw him stumble back into the road, still watching me as I disappeared into the night. With trembling fingers, I grabbed my phone and called the cops. They found the crashed car, just like I had seen it. But what they found inside? It was another driver, dead, not from a crash, but from something else. They believed the suitcase and the abandoned truck had been used to lure a driver into stopping, and he, the man in the road, had done the rest. My stomach dropped. The man was still standing by my window, grinning, but now his eyes were different, wider, expectant, like he knew I had seen the car. I rolled up the window immediately. His expression changed instantly. His grin disappeared, replaced by a look of rage. He lunged at my car, pounding on the glass with both fists. I hit the gas. My tires screeched against the pavement as I sped past him, my hands shaking as I struggled to keep control of the wheel. In my rearview mirror, I saw him stumble back into the road, still watching me as I disappeared into the night. With trembling fingers, I grabbed my phone and called the cops. They found the crashed car, just like I had seen it. But what they found inside? It was another driver, dead, not from a crash, but from something else. They believed the suitcase and the abandoned truck had been used to lure a driver into stopping, and he, the man in the road, had done the rest. I tried to ignore him. Maybe he was just a homeless guy looking for a place to stay warm. Maybe he was waiting for someone. But something about the way he stood completely still, his face barely visible in the dim light, unnerved me. I sipped my coffee, keeping my eyes on my dashboard. But every time I glanced up, he was still there, still watching. A strange feeling crept over me, the kind that makes the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. I suddenly didn't feel like resting here anymore. The snow was starting to pick up. I set my coffee in the cup holder, started the engine, and slowly pulled out of the lot. As I did, I took one last look in my mirror. He was gone. I merged onto the highway, pushing the thought from my mind. I was just being paranoid, I told myself. Just a weird guy at a truck stop. But then, 30 minutes later, I saw it. A glint of light in my side mirror, like something metallic, reflecting my headlights from behind my trailer. I kept checking my mirrors, expecting to see a car coming up behind me, but there was nothing. The highway was empty, just a dark, snow-covered stretch of road, disappearing into the night. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was there. Then, maybe an hour later, I saw it again, that same glint in my mirror. Only this time I reacted fast enough to catch a glimpse. There was a car, but it was right behind my trailer, so close that it had been hidden from my view. And the worst part? Its headlights were off. A chill ran through me. Who drives without headlights on a desolate highway in the middle of the night? I decided to switch lanes, maybe they'd just pass me. But as soon as I moved over, they followed. I went back to my original lane. They followed again. Now my heart was racing. They weren't just driving, they were watching me. I kept my speed steady, pretending I hadn't noticed. Then, suddenly, they slowed down. I watched in my mirrors as they drifted further and further back until they completely disappeared into the darkness. I should have felt relieved, but something about it felt worse, like they weren't gone, just waiting. 2 hours later, around 3 a.m., I finally pulled off at a rest stop. Just a small, empty lot on the side of the highway. I turned off the engine, leaned back in my seat, and tried to get some sleep. The snow was still falling gently outside. I don't know how long I was out, but something woke me up. A feeling. I slowly turned my head and saw a face staring at me through the window. I nearly fell out of my seat. The man outside the window didn't move. He just stared at me with unnaturally wide eyes, his breath fogging up the glass. Then slowly, he reached for the door handle. I locked it just in time. His expression twisted into something angry, his fingers yanking at the handle, testing it. Then, suddenly, he ran. His footsteps crunched through the snow, disappearing behind my truck. I barely had time to react before I saw it. A car pulling out from the darkness. It was the same car from before. They had been following me the entire time. I grabbed my radio and called for help, my voice shaking. Moments later, the car's taillights flickered on, and it sped off into the night. By the time the cops arrived, there was no sign of the man or the car. But as I replayed everything in my mind, the man at the truck stop, the car without headlights, the face at my window, one thing became clear. They had been planning something. I was 16 years old when I got my first job at a pizza place. After 6 months of work, I had finally saved up enough money to buy a cheap used car. This meant I could start doing deliveries, which was way better than working inside the shop. One night, around 9 p.m., I got an online order for 2 medium pizzas. Nothing unusual. I picked them up and hit the road. The streets were quiet, hardly any cars. But about 5 minutes into the drive, I noticed something odd. A car pulled onto the road behind me from a side street. I didn't think much of it. But when I turned into the neighborhood, I checked my mirror again. The car was still there. I tried to ignore it. Maybe it was just a coincidence. Maybe they lived in the same neighborhood. But as I drove deeper into the winding, tree-lined streets, the car stayed right behind me. Finally, I reached the delivery address, a small house with a long driveway tucked between the trees. I turned in, and for a brief second, I felt relieved. The car behind me kept driving. I parked at the end of the driveway, grabbed the pizzas, and walked up to the door. The porch light was on, but the house itself looked completely dark inside. I knocked once. No answer. I knocked again. After 30 seconds, a light suddenly flickered on inside, and a tired-looking woman in her 30s opened the door. She squinted at me like I had just woken her up. "What? Who are you?" she asked. I glanced at the pizzas in my hands. "I have a delivery for this address." She frowned. "I didn't order any pizza." I felt a chill crawl up my spine. She didn't order the pizza? I double-checked the address. It was correct. But as I stood there, something clicked in my mind. That car. The one that had been following me. I turned to head back to my car, my mind racing. Maybe it was just a mistake. Maybe it was nothing. Then I froze. At the end of the driveway, parked directly behind my car, was the same car from before. Its headlights were off, but I could see the faint glow of its exhaust. It was still running. My pulse pounded in my ears. This wasn't a coincidence. The car had been following me for miles, and now it was blocking the driveway. I climbed into my car, keeping my eyes on the dark shape in my mirror. They weren't moving. I tossed the pizzas onto the passenger seat and started the engine. Maybe if I pulled forward and turned around, they'd get the hint and move. I inched forward, my headlights sweeping across the house. But then, their doors opened. 4 men stepped out. They were all wearing hoodies, their faces hidden in the shadows. One of them had his hand tucked inside his pocket, like he was holding something. Then, without a word, they started running toward my car. I floored it. The car lurched forward, skidding slightly as I tried to swerve around them, but the driveway was too narrow. My back tires slid off the pavement, kicking up dirt and gravel. I slammed the wheel left, trying to correct, but crash! The car jerked violently as I plowed into a tree. The impact wasn't hard enough to set off the airbags, but it was enough to stun me for a second. Then I heard footsteps. They were running toward me. I threw open the door and bolted, sprinting toward the woods behind the house. One of them shouted and I could hear someone chasing me, but I didn't stop. I just ran. I don't know how long I kept going, but eventually their footsteps faded behind me. Breathless, I pulled out my phone and called 911. By the time the cops arrived, the men in the car were gone, and my car never found. The police believed they used a fake pizza order to lure a delivery driver, and I had just barely escaped.